I don't think I need the mic unless somebody in this room thinks I need the mic. I've been told I speak very loudly. Does that work for everybody in the room?
Yes.
All right, perfect. Thank you for your introduction. Thank you for the invite.
Tell us a little bit about you. Tell us a little bit.
So a little bit about myself. I am originally from the first state to ratify the Constitution. Does anybody know the answer to that?
Delaware.
Yeah, all right. I've been in California for 20 years. I've been at the National Conflict Resolution Center for 15 years. And I have been engrossed in this kind of work for the last 15 years, trying to help folks manage conflict, talk about conflict, think about conflict, all of the things related to that. Before I get into myself and what we're going to talk about today, though, I do think there are a few people in the room that I would like to acknowledge. Number one, the person who invited me here and introduced me to this group, Judge Susan Finley, has been a longtime supporter of the National Conflict Resolution. And without her, God knows who would be up here speaking today. Thank you very much, Susan. Another person is one of the founders of the National Conflict Resolution Center is here tonight. Her name is Robin Siegel. She's here in the second row. Without Robin, this organization would not be here this evening. So this organization was founded over almost 40 years ago, and she was part of that original group that helped build the National Conflict Resolution Center to be what it is today. The third guest is a self-proclaimed Republican, and he's my father. He's in the back. All right. Here in California staying for a couple of months, and he wanted to see what the heck I was up to down here. So I'm hoping he might be the person to ask the most difficult questions. He's definitely been the person that's asked the most difficult questions sometimes when I'm talking about politics, right? So I'm very excited to come here, right? Number one, it's Coronado. I live in East County, so coming out to this part of the San Diego County is very exciting to me. It's a beautiful area. I wasn't 100% just as excited to talk about how to talk about politics, though, with people that disagree, right? Because everybody's disagreeing. It seems like everybody's disagreeing right now about politics, right? It seems like every piece of news you look at, every piece of media that you search, all your feeds, the Facebook, the Instagrams, the newspapers, the opinion columns, everybody is arguing about what direction this country should go, right? I think, and I believe, and the National Conflict Resolution Center believes, that there's a way that you can do this effectively, okay? We really believe in conflict. We believe that we should disagree. You and I should not always agree. If you and I agree, we're not doing the right thing. If Democrats and Republicans and independents always agree, well, what's the use of even having different groups talk about different things, right? But what we want to do is we want to be able to enter into conflict with some degree of hope and confidence and respect that we can have a conversation about these things, right? We can really communicate about these things effectively if we can respect each other during that, okay? So that's what I'm going to try to focus on today, is how we can accomplish that. Just a couple tips. And really, this presentation is for you, right? So when I say something that you don't agree with, or maybe you want to ask me a question about, raise your hand, and I want you to ask those questions and talk about these things. I do only have 30 minutes, so no long tirades. All right. How about somebody read this quote for me?
Curiosity and respect for someone else's views are the foundation for bridging the political divide. Tanya Israel, PhD, UC Santa Barbara, Beyond Your Bubble.
All right. What is that? What kind of emotions does that get people thinking about? What do you start thinking about when you read that?
Have an open mind.
Have an open mind. That's that curiosity part. What else?
Learning something new.
Learning. Say that one more time.
Learning something new.
Learning something new. All right. You know, when we oftentimes go to have a conversation with somebody that disagrees with us, and we know they disagree with us, the most common thing we all want to do is walk in and tell them they're wrong, right? We want to tell them we know the right way, and I know that's the way you think, but it is wrong, because I know better, right? You know, however, I think one of the first steps, if there's any first step any of us can take when we're moving into those conversations, is moving and thinking that we're trying to gain understanding from the other person, right? It's not trying to, we're not trying to just convince them that they're wrong or convince them that we're right. We're looking for understanding. We're looking for me to understand you a little bit better and for you to understand me a little bit better, right? And that's the place to start, right? Because most likely a 7-8 minute conversation is not going to change somebody's ingrained beliefs that they have thought for the last 15-20 years of their life, right? But what it can do is help them understand your point of view just a little bit better and for you to understand their point of view a little bit better. And in the long term, once you keep on doing that, that builds to people feeling good enough and safe enough to change their mind about things that they've thought all their lives, right? And that's, I think, for me, that's what I think about when I read this quote. When I go to have a conversation, am I going there just to tell them what I think, or am I going there to understand more? And that's the first step. Let's go there to understand more. So, there are some political divisions in the United States of America, right? Big surprise, all right? And so I want to go over just a few of them and where a lot of people are in this continuum. The first one is this kind of on the far my right, but we should say left, right? The far left is this person, the progressive activists. These are people that are very ideological. They believe in a utopia is possible, that everything can work out perfectly, right? Those are the progressive activists, right? On this side, there's a conservative mindset, traditional and devoted to conservatives, right? The kind of party line Republican is what I'm talking about here. That really never really goes against the grain, right? People that stick with the actual, years and years and years of policies and stances that the Republican Party stands for. Was there a hand back there? Good. And then we had what I like to call the exhausted majority. Everybody else. I'm assuming a lot of people in this room, right? Traditional and passive liberals, right? People that are completely politically disengaged and people that are politically moderate, right? And that's what makes up most of the population. But if you look at your social media feeds, if you look at our newspapers, if you watch CNN and Fox News and Newsmax and all those channels, this is what they talk about. They talk about the people that are on the fringes. And that gets all of these people thinking that everybody thinks like that, right? But the reality is more of us are these people in the center that are just, why can't we get along? Why can't we make this country work? Why can't we have real conversations that move to change, right? That's what most of us want. We don't want just our agenda and nobody else's. And the reality is if you are an American that only wants your agenda and your party's agenda, does that make you an American? Right? Is that really the American spirit? The American spirit is working together across differences. That is the spirit, right? And so if you enter into these conversations with an unwillingness to change, I'm not sure why you're engaging in the conversations, right? Any thoughts on that? Yes, in the blue.
I just have a question. Is there something, I know, I think that adds up to 100, I'm not great at math, but isn't there something a little further to the right?
Yes, and there's probably something a little farther to the left.
Further right than the historic GOP.
Yes, there is probably something farther to the right. We couldn't fit it all in, and there's probably something farther to the left, right? And so I think we have to acknowledge that, right? Yes. And people that are in these little areas are sometimes feel like they're moving into those other areas. So yes, there is some more. Any other thoughts? All right, so no matter where you fall, yes, sir.
Just a statement about this. I think it's hard to control 67% of the U.S. population. But I can control the polls, which are moderated because of the way we take them and means by the extreme.
Right.
So if I move a very extreme 1%, I get a huge surge.
And I think the politicians know this, or some of the politicians know this. Sorry about that.
Representing us by media polls.
Of course. No matter where you fall in that line, or if you fall off of that line, okay, no matter where that is, you have to admit, this is science here, that you have some biases, right? This is one of the first steps in having good conversations, is understanding that our brains are biased. It's a human feature, not a Republican feature, a Democrat feature, an independent feature, an extremist feature. It's a human feature, right? And so when you're in this group, right, you favor your own groups over other groups. So whatever your group says, if the other Democrats say this is what we're doing, that's what we're doing. If the other Republicans say that's what we're doing, that's what we're going to do, because that's how your brain works. It's easy, right? It would be a lot more difficult if you had to think about every darn little thing that happens, right? The other piece is this polarization bias, right? This is that concept that, you know, it's overestimating the level of disagreement between oneself and the members of opposing political groups, right? Thinking that everybody, so if you're a Democrat, anybody that doesn't think like you is extreme. That's just the way it is. And if you're a Republican, all those Democrats, every last one of them, they're all just crazy and extreme. In reality, we're not. We're more moderate. Most people are more moderate. Okay? You also overestimate the prevalence of extreme beliefs within other groups, okay? We did this training one time a couple years ago for a group, and one person raised their hand and they said, well, this isn't a problem for us because we're not biased. Like and so I really didn't know what to say. It really was challenging. So again, I talked on the first, let's walk into a conversation with the goal of understanding, not to change each other's mind. Let's also walk into a conversation with this concept of not being biased, trying or doing your best to understand your bias and pushing it aside as much as possible. All right? Any questions on that one? Yes, this is Siegel.
A comment. So the word bias is negative, but if you said preferences, people can accept that. They have preferences. We all do. You choose who you want to spend your time with, what TV show you want to watch, and so on. And so that kind of changes the tone.
The only thing is preference sometimes makes me think I've chosen to think like this. This is my preference to think like I've given it logical thought. Sometimes biases are unconscious. They're things that are going on in the back of your brain, forcing you to think a certain way, when maybe if you gave it some critical thought, you might think differently, right? So that, I think that's just a little bit of difference, but I do think that people can hear it better when they say when you hear the word preference.
Yeah.
All right. So I've given you a few little tidbits of how to communicate effectively, and I'm going to ask you to do it already, okay? I want everybody in this room to turn to a person sitting next to them. Partners, groups of two. I'm going to ask you to do something once we arrive there. I'm hoping it doesn't take any more than 6 seconds for you to find a partner. Just find one partner, groups of two. Groups of two. All right. Once you arrive there with your partner, you have the one person that's sitting next to you that you're going to talk to. I really want somebody to do it with my dad back here, all right? Make sure somebody good sits in there. I want one person in those two-person group to put their arm in the air. One person put their arm in the air. All right. If I could have your attention, no talking for 1 second, so you can hear these instructions, okay? If you have your hand in the air, you support this statement. I know that maybe you don't, but I'm asking you for this exercise, okay? You support this statement. If your hand was not raised, you are against this statement. You now have 4 minutes to convince your partner that you are correct. I'm starting a timer, and it starts now.
Oh my goodness. I think I am tired.
convince the other person that they were right. Hold on, this person back here. I got everybody's attention real quick. All right, the person in the back says that they won.
They won.
Tell us about that.
If there is a place to take them, you can't just send them off.
And put into appropriate housing.
All right, and you convinced your partner. Good job. All right, how about any other comments? Up here, Robin.
We agreed that the word forcibly was the problem.
Oh, okay. You didn't like the language. Fair enough. Any other comments about how your conversations went? Yes, back here in the blue.
We did take the opposing sides, but I think we came to an agreement pretty early on that we both think that we're all served best by removing the homeless or having the homeless off the streets. The issue is, where are they housed? And then, because yes, they can be arrested, but they've got to be released, and where do they go to? And is it the right thing to arrest folks?
All right, so you arrived at a mutually kind of beneficial goal, kind of what you want to see happen, but you didn't necessarily know how to get there, right?
Right.
All right. One more comment in the back, and then we're going to move on.
You know, I'm just trying to, I don't defend that position, because you need to be more specific in the streets. If somebody's camping on the street, they need to be picked up and taken away, because it's a danger to be on the street. But now the sidewalk, on the park, that's a different question. Why do they call it a park?
So it was a safety issue and a language issue.
All right.
Perfect. All right, well, I'm glad you all did pretty good. I mean, I could just leave now. I mean, that's a possibility. But I want to go over a few ways that I think I can improve these conversations. Not I, we all can improve these conversations, right? The first one is this concept of being actively aware of what's going on, right? You want to identify people's underlying needs. There's a great book called Getting to Yes, written by a famous negotiator. Robin, what was his name?
Fisher and Uri.
Fisher and Uri, thank you. And read that book if you want to learn more about this. But the concept is any conflict you've ever been in, any argument you've ever been in, it's less about the actual substance and more about your underlying needs of why you believe in that thing, right? And if you start conversations talking about those underlying needs, you can move through that conflict and talk about it a lot easier, right? And arrive someplace. Next piece is you got to check your bias. We talked about that already, and your ego. Your ego, my ego, your ego, all of our egos get us into a lot of trouble because we want to be right all the time. Yes, Doris?
So how do you apply identifying underlying needs to the homeless conversation?
We'll get there.
Okay.
I'm hoping you'll do it, actually. And then you want to recognize style differences. This is a hard one for me, right? The reality is all of us communicate a little bit differently, and also the reality is some of us communicate very differently, right? But then we're all trying to communicate together, and sometimes it doesn't work, right? My wife is a processor, right? She wants to think about things and figure out and think about what's going on and how that works and what's going on. I don't need any time processing. You ask me any question right now, I will give you my opinion. I know exactly how I think about anything. Now, I'm probably wrong, and I probably jump to conclusions a lot as well. But the reality is when I'm ready to have a conversation, I can jump right in. Other people can't. And we have to understand that. So if you want to have a conversation with a processor, and you're not a processor, you might want to give them some time. If you want to have a conversation with someone that's not a processor, you might want to get your notes down and know exactly what you're going to say to them, right? And if you don't think about those things before you move into a conversation, I got bad news. Most likely that conversation is not going to go well. If your expectations are that you're going to have a good conversation, you have to think about these things. The second piece is you got to respond respectfully. That's easy to say. Yeah, make sure you're respectful when you respond, right? How do you do it? You actively listen. I'm sure everybody's been through some kind of training at some point in their life on how to actively listen. You make eye contact, you ask questions, you do all those things. For me, I think you got to take it one step further. It goes back to the beginning of the training, right? You got to be willing to have your mind change. If you're walking into that conversation only to convince others that you are right, I mean, I don't know. I just don't know what the value of that is all the time, right? If you're really looking to bridge the gap and try to find solutions that work for everybody, most likely walking into a conversation really just thinking you own the only truth isn't going to work, okay? ask open-ended questions. You have to ask people what they think, right? You can't just go in saying what you think, right? That's very important. And what's an open-ended question, right? It's something that you can't answer with a yes or no answer, right? It's something that people need to elaborate on. And you have to acknowledge without agreeing, right? Do you ever have somebody keep on talking, saying the same thing over and over and over again, and you want to say, I get it, I understand, okay? Stop repeating yourself. Well, the reality is when I say I get it, I understand, that's not telling the other person that I understand. That's telling them to shut up. That's what that's telling them. I mean, that's the reality of it. And even if I really do understand, right, that's what they're hearing. They're hearing me, look, I've had enough of whatever's coming out of your mouth now, right? So really you got to figure out a way to make sure they know you understand, right? Instead. The last piece is you got to troubleshoot together, right? You got to try to work on solutions together, okay? You got to tell your perspective in a non-confrontational way. You can't start, how do you think like that? That's an idiotic way to think. You got to really see it from the really science-based point of view. That's not going to work. That conversation is never going to be successful. It's going to feel good to your ego, and it's going to feel good that you said it, that you told that person they were wrong, but it's not going to move the needle, okay? You're going to look for mutually beneficial solutions, and you're going to end on a positive note. Even if you just spent the last hour and a half arguing about abortion with somebody, okay? And both of you, neither of you moved your stance at all. At least ended on, all right, look, I respect your opinion. I'm glad that we were able to engage about this, talk to about this, and I hope I can talk to you about it again, right? Even if it was a really tough conversation. Because you don't want to just close the door on it. If your goal is to move the needle and get somebody that believes in abortion to not believe in abortion, then don't close the door on that person. Keep it open. Let's keep on having this conversation, all right? Any questions or thoughts about it? I see a hand in the back.
Do you, would you say that, saying, oh, let's just agree to disagree, that's kind of a passive-aggressive way to handle something like that?
It is somewhat passive-aggressive, and you know, from our perspective, I don't want to agree to disagree. I think we have a chance to actually find a solution, right? And so, you know, I work at the National Conflict Resolution Center, so that's my response. That's what I believe in, and that's what our organization believes in, that we shouldn't just say, oh, we can't figure it out, let's just agree to disagree. That's not going to get us anywhere. Let's continue to talk. Let's continue to talk respectfully and continue to engage in a conversation that really can possibly change the way people think. Yes?
I can't help but think a lot of people are thinking the same as I am in terms of, I have no problem talking about a lot of things with people and respecting their position, but when it comes to Trump, if you're saying, you know, out of the chute, you have to respect their basic tenet. I can't do it. I don't know.
Well, then, I think this is a very good point, and if you can't do it, she mentioned that sometimes when the topic of Trump comes up, she has a very difficult time engaging with people because she doesn't want even really respect that their thoughts that, you know, maybe he's a good candidate or he was a good president or any of those things, right? And my answer to that would be, if you don't think you can engage in any conversation in a respectful way, then don't engage in it. What's the use? What's the value in it? Right? There is no value. If you think you can, then give it a try. Yes?
What do you do when you get no respect and you're in a situation where you can't leave?
You can't leave.
Headphones.
I think you got to continue to advocate for yourself, right? In the most respectful way possible and a way that feels safe for you. If you are really in a place where you can't leave, it might be bigger than conflict resolution, right? And I think that's a safety issue, right? I'm going to have an opportunity for Q&As here in a little bit. Do you have any questions directly related to these skills and techniques?
No.
All right, it's your turn again, right? Now, I want the same thing, you guys keep your same stances, everybody keeps their stances. I only want you to change one thing, and that is one person can talk at a time, okay? And you have to attempt to use some of the things that I just talked about. All right? I'm going to give you another 3-4 minutes to do that. You can start now.
You and I
Yes. Was anything different for anybody from round 1 and round 2? There was a difference here. Tell me what the difference was for you.
Well, we didn't talk over each other.
Okay.
You know, I took a position that's different than the one that I normally have, but I'm argumentative, so I'm really good at this. Carol Rogerson and Laura Wilkinson, Carol convinced me that we should not forcibly remove people from their encampments on the streets.
Good job. Very good job. Any other differences that anybody would like to mention? We'll go back here and then to you, sir.
Well, rather than state the problem that way, we restated the problem. What should we do about homeless people?
All right.
And that created his perspective, my perspective, and then we worked through it.
So you asked some good questions, right? And you actually used the right language that both of you could work with. This gentleman here?
We basically tried to find things that we agreed on before we got to the point that we disagreed on.
Perfect, right? Let's look for similarities and commonalities before we focus on what we don't agree on. All right, I only have time for 2 more comments. And this woman back here in the blue was had an arm up for some other folks.
So we, by accident, took the opposing positions of what we actually believed, and so it made me think through the arguments that would convince me to take her stance, it made her think through the arguments that would convince her to take my stance, and it made it really easy to come to agreement.
Very good. Critically thinking about the issue from both sides before you entered into the conversation. All right, we're going to do one more comment back here, and then we're going to have time for Q&A.
We discovered that we actually want the same thing, and that we, but that we have thought previously and still probably think of different approaches, but we want the same thing.
That's one of the coolest parts about sometimes communicating effectively is finding out you have 2 opposing views, but you actually want the same thing at the end, right? That's a way to get somewhere. So obviously, you know, the things we talked about is this concept of active awareness, responding respectfully, and troubleshooting together. This was adapted from a 3-hour training, so if anybody's really, really interested in this stuff, we dig into each one of those bullets one at a time and have some conversations and exercises around that, so you can contact me if you're interested in that. But good job. I think you all did a really good job. One thing I noticed during that second round is that it was quieter. Right? And that's an interesting thing, that it just is a little bit quieter, okay? Here's some tips for dialogue. There was some little bookmarks as you came in that had all these tips for dialogue on them. I hope you grabbed them. Let go of believing that you own the only truth about a situation, right? Ask yourself, how can I say what I want to tell them in a way they can hear. This is so important. This is so important. You're dealing with all kinds of different humans. Make sure you say it in a way the other person can pick it up, right? Work on trying to be thoughtful instead of trying to prove that you were right. This will get you to possibly helping somebody change their opinion. I understand that's the goal, especially in politics, right? Policies and all this, we want people to vote a certain way, right? But if you start here, you might end in a place that actually can help change people's minds. Do what you can to really listen to the other person. As much as possible, show genuine curiosity, right? We talked about listening effectively lately. If you're listening effectively just to make it look like you're listening effectively, that's not listening effectively. Okay? If you took a course with the National Conflict Resolution Center or somebody else and they taught you eye contact, ask questions, do this, do that, and you're just going and doing all the things just so you can say your point, you're not listening effectively. And you're not being genuine either, right? Take time to ground yourself before talking to the other person. I do a really bad job when I have to have a conflict and a conversation when I'm, up here, right? I am not good at it. My brain does not allow me to be good at it. And I've been doing this stuff for 15 years. So either it's a human nature thing or it's just real for all of us, all right? We have a little bit of time, maybe about 5 to 10 minutes for questions.
Yes, 10 minutes.
All right, and I'll start here with Lee.
Yeah, I just wondered if you're going to make this slideshow available to the club, or if the club will put it on their website.
Yes.
Thanks.
Yes, we will. We'll have it available through our YouTube channel.
Great, thank
The
you.
Coronado Democrats.
Let's go here to this gentleman.
Okay. We talked earlier, remember, about getting to yes, and I'm wondering, when you had your chart of the extremes, you kind of stopped before both extremes and acknowledged that. Is that an acknowledgement of the fact, and based on the comment of he shall not be mentioned, is that a reality that on the extremes, maybe, and I'm a believer in this stuff, but won't work with the extremes? Is that why they were let off?
The word extremist tells you a lot, right? If you're an extremist, most likely you're not really interested in having any conversations with anybody that would like to change your mind from being an extremist, right? And so yes, the concepts that I talked about work really well with rational people. Now, I have a sister who thinks she's rational, but I don't think she's too rational at all. And this stuff doesn't necessarily work with her all the time, okay? So, but what it will work with humans that are willing to collaborate and communicate effectively. But if you are working with an extremist or someone that's just completely irrational, I don't have the answers for you. A question over here.
How do you get past, if you start a conversation with someone who starts throwing labels and name calling and media garbage at you? How do you
So I
get
think,
past
remember
that?
those tips, right? We talked about grounding yourself, right? So make sure you're grounded, right? Make sure you don't let your ego get in the way, because when people attack me, I want to attack back. That's what I want to do. You call me a racist, I want to call you all kinds of other names because I don't think I'm a racist, right? And so definitely calling them names and attacking them back isn't going to be helpful. It's just going to escalate the situation, right? So what you do is you attempt to acknowledge what they're trying to say. Make sure they know that you understand what they're trying to say, right? You try to de-escalate them by using those skills on respond respectfully, actively listen, ask an open-ended question, acknowledge without agreeing, right? And when it's your turn to talk, you get to say what you want to say, right? So, and how you respond respectfully and how you identify people's needs, this part over here, there's a skill set to it. And reading the book Getting to Yes or doing a 4-hour training with us will help you learn those skills. All right, all the way, let's go over here to the window.
I find that I learn more from people that I disagree with than I agree with.
That's great. Tell us more. Say more.
So when you ask people why they think that way, they tell me, and I say, well, I see that point. Maybe I should consider that myself.
That's what a conversation should look like. I know it doesn't look like that on TV between some of our leaders. It doesn't look like that in the newspaper, in some opinion column. I acknowledge that it does not look like that all the time, but that's the goal. Let's go to Rebecca.
When you're having a dialogue with someone and you don't believe them to be an extremist, but they cite
to what they truly believe are facts, but you objectively maybe have seen something with your own eyes, so you know what they're telling you isn't true. That's a tricky situation about trying to acknowledge something that you know to not be true, but also not offend them by saying, that's not really what happened.
One thing that science has proved doesn't work is telling them that that's not true. Unfortunately, I know all of us, everybody in this room would like to use that technique, but science says it just shuts down the conversation.
So what do you do?
So instead, that's not the way I understood it. I have understood it in this other way, or I have seen things that led me to believe this. Not telling them they're wrong, but stating what your experience and your understanding of something.
So my perspective and experience.
I think is the best way. All right, back here.
What about people's different news sources? So their facts their reality comes from a different place than your reality. So how do you have conversations when it's offensive to question you, where you're getting your information because your sources to them are suspicious, and the same with them, because now with disinformation and such different realities, it seems like being presented in the media, people come armed with different realities to conversation.
Well, I think when there was one reality, let's say there was one newspaper in a town and everybody read it, right?
Yeah.
It was a lot easier. There wasn't that misinformation.
Yes.
And you had to have, even when your perspectives were different, you still had to have a conversation, even though you were dealing with the same facts,
Yes.
right? Well, now, yes, you're right. There are different facts out there, or at least people think that there are different facts out there. And it's going to take longer to have these conversations, right? So if you want to engage in these conversations with people that are living in a different reality than your own, understanding that possibly your reality is also wrong, and understanding that theirs could also be, stretched, I think it's just going to take longer, and continue to speak respectfully to each other and continue to communicate. That's all we can do, right? Comment here?
There have been studies on the differences, the cognitive differences in the Republican brain and the Democratic brain. That there is something that's physiologically embedded in the way you think.
Can't hear it.
Her comment was there has been some studies that have shown that folks that are in the Republican Party and folks that are in the Democratic Party, their brains actually think differently and work differently. I would have to say, without a study, we probably all knew that, right? I can acknowledge that as a fact, right? However, again, and I know I sound like a broken record, but with communication, just like with exercise, right? If you're exercising and you're not losing any weight, guess what you have to do? Exercise more or eat less, one or the other, right? And just like with a conflict and with two people with different perspectives, sometimes you might be able to work through that different perspective in 10 minutes. Sometimes it takes 10 years. But if you continue doing it respectfully, how many more minutes do we have?
7.
I have a question.
Well, I just want to go back here. I have a couple people that had their hands up, and then I'm going to come to you. Right here.
Yeah, I just wanted to say quickly, one of the benefits of having that discussion and reversing it, it was very interesting, and the real benefit that came from it is all of a sudden I go, oh, and I'm against it, but it was like I said, oh, but they have mental illness. And so they may not, if you just don't remove them, they won't, you try to tell them all these loving things, but they won't understand you because they're mentally ill. So it was just really amazing because we hadn't thought
through that.
Yes.
And I think that's what slowing down and checking your biases and losing your ego, it allows you to understand something that you didn't understand before. It might not change your mind, but at least you understand something different. I think there were some hands back here that I was ignoring for some time. Right here, sir.
Well, I guess there's people on the island where I kind of know the perspective, the bumper sticker or what they have in their front yard. And I don't want to be totally isolated. So I still acknowledge that they are there, and I'll speak to them. And there's a certain area of agreement that we can talk about. Beaches are polluted.
Right. There you go. Let's start there.
At least we're not in a relationship that's totally at odds with everybody on the island, you know?
I think that's such a key. Find your similarities, right? And having a relationship with other humans really helps as well, right? If I know my neighbor Jill and I know she thinks very different than me all the time, except for what time happy hour is, well, maybe I might go have a glass of wine with Jill and not talk about politics. And I might do that for a year or two, right? And then maybe I've engaged enough with Jill and we have enough trust with each other that we can have those more difficult conversations, right? But I'm not just going to roll over to Jill's house on Saturday morning while I'm drinking my coffee to talk about abortion rights, right? And so I think you got to know it's your time and your place. You got to build a relationship with people, and you got to find your similarities, right? Over here against the wall.
Do you have any tips for when you're discussing or debating an issue with someone and they keep changing the goalposts? So they raise an issue, you respond to it, and then they just switch to something else. Switch to something else.
I think you tell them. What it feels like right now is that we're talking about police brutality, but then as soon as, I thought that's what we were talking about, but it seems like you shifted the conversation to racism now, right? Or you shifted the conversation to politicians now. I'd like to focus still on this concept of how police treat people, right? Or I just want us to acknowledge that we're moving to this new topic, right? Or, whatever it is, I think putting it out there in the most respectful way possible. This is how I'm seeing how this conversation is going. I could be wrong. Help me understand if I am. Right? What else? Have a question up here? Oh yeah, Carol. Sorry. Thank you, everybody.
How would you handle something when somebody who you know has a different opinion than yours on most things walks up to you, drops a self-aggrandizing, self-serving insult at you, and then turns and walks away before you have a chance to engage?
Hold on, I work for the National Comic Resolution. That did not happen. All right, that's now. I think you let them walk away. You let go of your ego.
No ego.
Yeah, you just let go of your ego and you say,
Thank you for sharing that.
Yeah, thank you for sharing that. And you move on with your life, right? Because if you know that your goal is to engage with people respectfully, you know that's what your goal is.
Okay, tell us.
Over here in the front row.
I thought about Charlottesville a lot during the presentation today. And trying to feel like there are good people on both sides, which I do not believe. I do not believe there are good people on both sides in Charlottesville. And when you talk about walking away from people, I mean, in our country, you might be talking about 25% of the country. And if Trump's base largely consists of white supremacists, for lack of a better term, National Socialists, perhaps.
Can you prove that?
No. Well, I think here's what I think. I think you as an individual get to choose what conversations you engage in. And if you want to engage with a group of white supremacists that you think are a group of white supremacists, right? Then I think you should do that, and you should do it in a respectful way. And if they don't give that back to you, and you're not enjoying that, then you should stop doing it, right? But that doesn't mean you have to stop working on the issue of white supremacy in America, right? Just because white supremacists won't have a conversation with you, right? You can still find new avenues, different ways. You can still talk about what's important to you, right? And so we can't force any humans to behave in any certain way. We can't, I mean, that's just the reality of it, right? And it's the beauty of America in a sense as well, right? So, although I would hope no one in this room, I would say I don't support white supremacy, right? I know that sometimes I might not be able to change their minds with the best techniques in the world. I got probably two minutes, so one or two more questions. We'll go to this gentleman.
So I just want to say I really respect what you're trying to do, but it seems like you're swimming against the tide. Because politics has become more divisive, and you become, in some circles, labeled as a loser or a rhino if you're a Republican, if you try to compromise. It's a dirty word. In the media, you make more money if you're divisive. And so, and people are retreating into their bubbles. So I want to live in a community that's just like me. So you have fewer opportunities to have these conversations with people you disagree with, because it's
I think it feels like that.
Yeah,
and I think that's a real feeling for all of us. Okay, but I believe in humans. I believe in humans have the ability to make change, to act appropriately, and do the right thing. And the right thing maybe might look different for each and every one of us. But we just got to keep trying.
Can you do some training for political leaders then?
I have room for one more, and we're going to go with Nori? Mary.
I just wondered if you, in all of your work, have seen a few underlying needs pop up no matter what the subject is. Are we
Yes.
going to go back to Maslow's hierarchy of needs?
Yes.
Where are we going?
Robin, help me out here, but a couple that come to mind are fairness, respect, equity, equality. What are some other big ones?
Safety?
Safety is another important one. These are needs that we all have, right? And, you know, I think a good example is a gun makes some people feel safe, and a gun makes other people not feel safe, right? That's the reality of the human brain and who we are as humans. We are allowed to think differently about those two things, right? But when we come together and we talk about safety is important to me, we could probably figure out a way, right, to have a conversation. Well, I don't know. I don't have a lot of faith in some of our leaders right now, but I think humans can actually have that conversation. And thank you so much.
Wow.
I know we have a lot of people who are not interested in club agendas, so thank you everyone for being here. I hope you can see Ms. Carroll again. I hope you see Joe again.